In mid-2017, I made a video showing the results of some experiments using CO2 monitors. The purpose was to see if there was a significant difference in air temperature in a closed environment with high amounts of CO2 compared to the air temperature in a closed environment with normal amounts of CO2. The outcome of that series of experiments showed no difference in the two closed environments. In other words, the presence of much higher CO2 did not have any effect on the air temperature. If you want to view that previous video, just click the link below. There you can see the video and read comments made by some of the observers of that video. Some of the comments made about that previous video mentioned the lack of a light bulb representing the sun, the idea being that higher concentration of CO2 would cause the air temperature to rise if there was a light shining on the containers. With that in mind, I did another experiment to see if a strong light bulb would have a significant effect. I want to share with you the results of that experiment. Here is container A showing 731 parts per million of CO2 and a temperature of 80.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Here is container B with 7,515 parts per million of CO2, over 10 times the amount in container A, with the same temperature of 80.6 degrees. Next, here is the floodlight representing the sun, a 580 lumens, 120 volt, 65 watt bulb. In this picture, you can see the layout of the light and the two sealed containers, each with a CO2 monitor inside. 10 minutes after turning on the light bulb, it is now 11 o'clock. The temperature in container A has risen to 82.4 degrees. The temperature in container B, the high CO2 container, is also at 82.4 degrees. At 11:23, the temperature in container A is 87.8 degrees, and the temperature of container B is exactly the same at 87.8 degrees. At 11:40, the temperature in container A is 89.6 degrees, and the temperature of container B is exactly the same at 89.6 degrees. At 12:04, the temperature in container A is now 91.4 degrees, and the temperature of container B is also exactly the same at 91.4 degrees. At 12:22, the temperature in container A has climbed to 93.2 degrees. The temperature of container B is actually now lower than that of container A at 91.4 degrees. This may be an anomaly, but it runs counter to the narrative that a significantly high amount of CO2 raises the temperature above that of normal CO2 concentration. These pictures seem to indicate that much higher levels of CO2 in container B did not make any difference in the temperatures inside the two containers. Now here is a possible weakness with this experiment. Even though both containers are sealed, you can see that with the passage of time, the amount of CO2 in the high CO2 container decreases. This is probably due to the fact that a CO2 atom is heavier than most other atoms in the air, and thus those atoms gradually sink below the level of the sensor in the CO2 monitor. It is, however, doubtful that this has any effect on the lack of difference between the temperatures of the two containers. I encourage skeptical inquiry into this experiment. I also encourage as many as are interested to purchase your own instruments and run this experiment yourself. I think it would be great to have this experiment repeated thousands of times all over the world. Does this experiment prove that CO2 does not cause global warming? I make no such claim. I am only demonstrating the results of this single experiment using these specific instruments. There may or may not be other ramifications regarding these data. but that is outside the limits of this experiment. The issue of the relationship, if any, between CO2 and global warming is certainly a discussion worth having. Based on the data from this experiment, it appears that high amounts of CO2 in the air make no difference in the temperature of the air. As always, I encourage a fact-based discussion of the results of this experiment.